Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and on this episode, I am pumped to have Matt Waldman on the show. He is the creator of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, and he is also a senior writer over at Football Guys. Matt, welcome to the show.
Ed, always a pleasure to do this with you. Glad to catch up.
It's always good to do this once a year, talk about some football prospects, and I can't wait to get into it. Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. Looking for some action on any given weekend? This is the free service for you, as 5 Nugget Saturday is my curated list of tips in analytics. To sign up for free, go to thepowerrank.com. Matt, what is this RSP, this Rookie Scouting Portfolio, and who should buy it?
Well, it's a publication that's been available for 20 years now, and it is an analysis of quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. It is one of the 2 most purchased publications for cross-checking by NFL people for scouting purposes. I would say that some of the clients that I have include a fair amount of scouts, according to recruiting directors at the Division I level, who visit with these guys on a daily, if not weekly basis, or daily, weekly, if not daily basis, and some GMs, some owners, folks like that. And as well, obviously, it's also not just rooted in football analysis where I'm studying tape, but it's also from a fantasy point of view where I add a fantasy point of view to it, mostly with the post-draft. So what you get is a pre-draft and post-draft guide. The pre-draft is basically an analytical process where I'm reducing as much variation as possible in terms of how I look at players from player to player, game to game. This is rooted in best practices that I used in a quality management arena many, many years ago, in a different profession. And so what I'm taking is film watching and putting it through an analytical point of view where everything's defined, the criteria is defined, the way it's scored is designed to reduce variation, and it's designed to be able to, for me to be able to continue to improve the process over the years. And that's something that I've spent a lot of time doing over those 20-year periods. So you get very in-depth scouting reports on techniques and concepts and athletic ability, and then shows you how I score it, how I grade it. You could use it if you wanted to spend the hours to watch tape, you could use this system, and it would help you in terms of learning more about how to scout players. And then the post-draft is really more a re-ranking of players based on fit with the team and the scheme, and also looking at average draft position for about 10 to 12 different leagues. And I give you like a sweet spot of where to draft these players in a cheat sheet that's a couple pages long that covers about 250 to 300 players. You're never going to need that many, but I like to give you the list of a lot of those players. And it gives you a sweet spot ranking of where to look at a player relative to where I rank them. So if, for instance, in the past, I thought Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson were 2 of the better quarterbacks in the class, in their respective classes, and the average draft position was later than where I was ranking them, then I would tell you where you could comfortably get them without losing a shot of getting sniped, or if I think they're overrated, I'm showing you where you're going to need to take them in order to get them, even though I've got them ranked lower. So you get those 2 things for $21.95 at mattwaldman.com, and it's popular among not just from football, but fantasy analysts, fantasy players, and media, football media. So I would say those are the main customers there.
It seems way too inexpensive to me, Matt. I think I
That's
tell you
the
that every year.
and everyone tells me that every year. I would say the process for becoming an RSP subscriber is usually this. My takes tend to be a little different than a lot of people. So every once in a while I get called an idiot, and then usually what happens is that it works out. Like, let's see, last year's idiot response was to me saying that Lad McConkey would probably be a top 15, if not top 10 fantasy receiver year one, and was one of the most productive options that you could get back in May and June. I mentioned that. So, there was the idiot factor for that. We could talk about Lamar Jackson or Nick Chubb or Patrick Mahomes, or also AJ Brown having the best fit of the receivers, or who else? Chris Olave as a rookie, or Justin Jefferson as a rookie, things like that. Usually I'm called an idiot once a year for something like that. Then they realize that maybe I wasn't such an idiot after all. Maybe they should look into it. And then it sounds like I'm being a used car salesman, because I'm telling them all the things that they can get and retweeting all the responses I get from people, that they must think somehow I spend more time concocting these responses on various secret accounts I have, rather than studying film. And then they buy it and they go, wow, I didn't expect what I got. I'm pleasantly shocked. Then I'm going to be a subscriber for life. And then the third response is usually, yeah, you charge way too little for this. So that's kind of the process for becoming a subscriber to the Rookie Scouting Portfolio.
I missed that calling you an idiot part, just for the record.
I appreciate it, but I've had some media people say that and then apologize, so it's been kind of gratifying when that's happened. But
it's pretty cool. You did mention that there is another scouting service that the NFL types also look at. What is that?
Oh, well, I mean, that's generally what they do. They look at. The fantasy people look at a different one. Like, so you get the other scouting service of the two. Yeah. Oh, it's
the one that you mentioned at the beginning.
Dane Brugler.
Okay.
Dane Brugler's the beast. So, Dane covers all the prospects. I cover only 4, because I decide that I really want to go deep with those 4. And the quick story I'll tell you about that is that last year, an owner talked to someone who's a friend of mine and a beat writer, and they've known each other fairly well over the years. And the owner was like, I'm trying to learn a little bit more about scouting, but from outside my own purview of my team, because they're busy doing the work and I don't want to take too much of their time. Are there any outside sources? And, of course, he mentioned Dane, and the guy took out his notebook and started writing it down. And then he mentioned me, and the guy closed the notebook and smiled and said, "Oh no, I'm well aware of him already," and asked if he was friends with me, and asked some more questions about me, which made me laugh, because in the public space, it's absolutely Dane Brugler would be the guy that most fans would know, who are football fans who are into the draft. And me, I'd be the person that they'd be trying to write down and spell my name and where my site is and all that stuff. So it's kind of funny that in the NFL, I wouldn't say it's reversed, but I would say in that case with this team, and it's a successful team, that it was reversed. So it was kind of funny.
Matt, how do you define confidence for a quarterback, and who might have it in this draft class?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, because really, for me, I think of confidence in respect to decision making and how fast they act on what they see. So to me, it's a subset factor of processing, because Alex Smith is a great example of a player who processes fast. Now, if you're talking on paper, or if you're talking on the whiteboard, or if you're talking on the Wonderlic back in the day, or a pro day, or academically, there's academic processing. Book smarts, I would say, is related to that. How quickly do you retain information, intellectually, from in a classroom setting, or reading information or seeing information that's static. It's not on the move. It's not physical. And Alex Smith was really good at that. And the NFL back in the day would probably place too much value on that. But when you put him on the field, what you would see is that, yes, he understood the defenses and he'd see the defense, but instead of being like fast enough to act on the information, as smart as he was kind of like the equivalent of an economist at quarterback, where it's like you see the beginnings of information, but you're like, hey, listen, by theory, I've got to wait and see if this is really the case before I can start talking about it. I got to get more data. And in the NFL, on a field, you can't get more data. You have to look at you have to know where that data is and realize that you're not looking for more data. You're looking for the accurate moment of data. And so for Alex Smith, he would often be 1, 2, 3 steps late to throw the football in key moments. And while, theoretically you put him in a quarterback room and it's great to learn about the game of football, when you actually have to execute it on the field, he was a little slow in key moments that always kind of held him back, or every answer, or he followed the theory to the point that the right answer to every play is a check down, based on the way that coaches do things. So, and he was kind of a captain check down at times. Where in contrast, Patrick Mahomes, or even to the further end of the spectrum, Brett Favre, Brett Favre didn't even know what a nickel defense was for the first couple of years as a starter, and asked Ty Detmer in the middle of a meeting about what's this nickel defense that the coach keeps talking about. But he's also the guy that they can credit for basically creating the RPO based on how he was reading what a defense was doing and how to kind of find solutions to it. And he was always very confident in putting the ball in there. And yes, he made a lot of mistakes, but he also made a lot of big plays that led to 3 MVP awards and a Super Bowl victory. So there's a different kind of intelligence than what maybe NFL teams have been looking at until recently. So confidence is that ability that, like, the minute you see, or the split second that you see the ideal leverage in favor of the receiver or in favor of the defender, you have the confidence in either throwing the ball when it's favorable to you, or going to the next read immediately when it isn't, and identifying it again, making that the correct identifier to the next read, and being able to do that, really without any hesitation. And so, confidence can, the thing about confidence though is that you can define that, and you can say that applies to various situations where a quarterback can be very confident in the intermediate range. You can be very confident in the middle of the field, but not confident against certain leverage reads on the boundary, or it can be the opposite. Or under pressure, the confidence wanes in terms of being able to move around, be able to move from progression to progression. But if they know the blitz is coming, they identify where it is, and they can show the confidence to make the reads they need to within that time span. Whereas someone like Kenny Pickett, as we were talking about off the show, he's someone that if the pressure surprises him, and from a source that he didn't anticipate pre-snap, his game falls apart more. So confidence is one of those things that you can make it a variable, but I would say it's more like you're measuring where all the different places where confidence is and isn't. And when you are starting off as a player, your confidence can grow or wane based on where you fit with the team and what kind of things are happening to you. I mean, it's just like your confidence that you're safe is probably pretty strong, in general. But if you were the unfortunate victim of a violent crime, your confidence, even in your own house, when you
Right.
hear a strange sound, it probably wanes. I walked in on a robber once when I was at the University of Miami, and nothing happened to me, but it was I walked into my room, and he was a teenage kid hiding in my room after a New Year's Eve gig, that I had as a musician. I walked in and he was hiding and he was just as scared as I was. But like, by when we had the interaction, I always felt safe in my house. Never in my life, I never did, never felt unsafe. But after that interaction, where the adrenaline takes over, and when he popped up out of the room and his voice was quivering and talking, and I couldn't see him, and I realized he was about a foot taller than I was, and we were about 4 feet away from each other. The next thing I remember, I was outside the apartment, and I had grabbed a fire extinguisher that was hanging on the side of it, and I was holding it kind of like a baseball bat, waiting for him to come out of the door. And I was trying to consider, with the adrenaline pumping, whether I was going to take a swing at him or I was going to go to the people in the courtyard, in the middle of the courtyard over there, and and go over to them. And meanwhile, he's in the hallway looking around. Should I go out the window I came from the bathroom, or should I leave? I ended up going to the people because I was at least I was wise enough for that. And he rode a bike we were trying to keep for somebody so it wouldn't get stolen. And he rode it right out the apartment. But funny enough, for about a week, being back at my house that I grew up in, for a week, it was uncomfortable to be in the dark. I'd never been afraid of the dark, and it was uncomfortable for that, or any strange noise I wasn't familiar with kind of had me a little bit on edge. And it took about a week for me to kind of like get over that and just go back to normal. So when you think about a football player, like a quarterback with confidence, if you have the equivalent of someone slamming a windowsill or a window on your hand that's being held out in the sill, and it happens once or twice, and it's not super hard, you probably your hand's probably not going to quiver if you put your hand in an open windowsill. But if some sadist happened to kidnap you and start slamming that window on your hand, a few times a day and made it some sort of sick torture device, you'd probably look at an open sill and start sweating. And so when you think about the NFL, as gross and macabre as all that sounds, in the NFL, when you get hit in these car accidents by someone like a Shamar Stewart, who's going to be in the NFL, who just got drafted by the Bengals, someone who's going to play at 260 to 280 and has great strength and speed, you get blindsided by that a few times in a game, and you do it in a way that you get repetitively hit. Your confidence in being able to hang into a pocket or to be able to make the right read and not overthink things falters for a while, and you have to either rebuild it or you can lose it entirely, like Stanford's Trent Edwards way back in the day, who was very tough at Stanford, but once he got his bell rung by I want to say it was Adrian Wilson, in Buffalo, it completely changed his game. He could not play from the pocket the way that he used to. So confidence is it's a thing you can measure, but it changes. It's a variable.
So how do you measure it? I mean, are you actually, is this part of your checklist that you do for, say, a quarterback, or is it a little more subjective than that?
I think for me, confidence to me isn't something that I write down and say I'll write it down and comment about what I'm seeing. But for me, it's more as a part of a process. So I'm looking for decision making, and is he reading the leverage and delivering it appropriately based on the leverage and in a timely manner. So it's more about timeliness and
Okay.
that time.
Yeah,
And
the
so,
timeliness.
yeah.
And
So,
does it
yeah.
when you're watching a player, does it kind of, in soccer and youth soccer development, we always talk about playing fast. Does that kind of manifest itself that way for guys on tape for you? Like a quarterback sees it and it looks like he's playing fast because he gets that ball out quick once he's made the right decision.
Yeah. And it's funny because people talk about how the game slows down for top players, but they're playing fast. But I mean, it's like, as folks who know me know that, I play music, and as a musician, you practice things super slow to be able to play it really fast. Like you get it ingrained so that that from a musician standpoint that you're really hearing it well, and it's so well ingrained when you're hearing it that that recognition is much faster when you're playing up to a different tempo. Now you still have the physical manifestations of playing at a high speed where you've got to work and drill that at a higher tempo as well, eventually work it to a higher tempo so that the mechanical muscle memory aspects and the techniques of those muscle memories are well coordinated. But you do start slow and build your way up. And I would say that with quarterbacks, the mental conceptual end sees things unfold slower because now you've got the motor skills, because you've worked the motor skills and the recognition fast enough and you've coordinated those things slow to fast. When you're on the field, they look like they're playing it fast, but they're seeing it unfold slowly. It's kind of like if you were people who do emergency work, any type, probably who are dealing with stressful situations, they've seen enough stressful situations where it's slow, it unfolds a little slower for them in their mind, but they're moving in a very fluid and quick manner that other people think, wow, you really acted fast, when in their mind it's like the Matrix where it's going slow.
Right. Maybe give us one quarterback that has confidence, at least on the film that you've seen, and one that doesn't for this draft class.
Oh gosh, let's see. For this class,
None of them.
I would say that there are various aspects where guys are more confident than other, but I would say across the board, I would say that Jalen Milroe was the one who showed the most confidence in situations where he had to integrate the most tools, techniques, and concepts within a play, where pressure's bearing down. He's having to move from first to second to third read. He's having to manipulate a defender while pressure's bearing down on him and make slight movement from the pocket and still like trick the basically the flat defender or the hook curl defender, the linebacker in this case, and make him take a step in the opposite direction and then immediately turn and throw the minute that defender made those steps. I would say he showed the best level of confidence in terms of the things that are the most NFL caliber, most difficult things from an NFL caliber standpoint. Does it mean that he has the confidence in the widest range of things that a quarterback's expected to do in the NFL? Not yet, but I think that the things that are the toughest to do, he does well, and that bodes well for him to get better at it. I would say that Dylan Gabriel's a good example of a quarterback who just he waits too long on certain types of throws in the middle of the field with certain types of coverages where he maybe has a high-low look, and he'll wait for it to come open way too long when he should have identified that it's not coming open. And then it forces him to create off structure in situations where he could have bought more time earlier to create on structure.
That's awesome. I appreciate that second example. Matt, let's go back to Jalen Milroe, because this was an interesting statement that you wrote in the rookie scouting portfolio. Quote, if I were a pivotal decision maker for an NFL team, Jalen Milroe is the only quarterback I'm considering within the first 3 rounds of the draft in this class. I'll take shots on passers available later who have potential growth as a journeyman starters or reserves. Maybe one of them surprises us and proves that there's a lot more to his game. Otherwise, Milroe is it, period, end of story, end quote. He ends up going to the 3rd round to Seattle. Obviously, you've talked about his confidence. What else in his game, what else about him do you like so much?
Yeah, I mean, well, one, he's very smart. So when you combine the fact that you have an academic Heisman winner with the book smarts, along with the showing a promise with the confidence that motor skill smarts, recognition smarts that we just spent a lot of time talking about, he has both. And I don't think most of these players, most of the quarterbacks in this class really have both. I would also say he has quiet feet in the pocket, which again is the ability to make subtle movements to keep yourself in a position to see the field and make accurate throws. That's something Lamar Jackson has, Joe Burrow has, Ben Roethlisberger had, Aaron Rodgers has had. The top quarterbacks have that. Tom Brady, and regardless of whether you can move or not, he also has. While he's working on a lot of different mechanical things, he has one of the quickest releases I've seen. It's very compact, and so getting the ball out, getting it out quickly, not a problem, especially for a player who can maneuver the pocket like he does. And then the fact that he runs in the open field like he's Matt Forte, and has speed like that is just it shouldn't even be an oh by the way type of scenario, but it is. But when you're looking at these other quarterbacks in this class, I mean, certainly Cam Ward has some athletic ability, and he's a good prospect, and I'd understand why teams would want to consider him. But from a standpoint of really, watching a quarterback who's had to throw downfield, who didn't have a ton of manufactured RPO looks, didn't have or wasn't playing off structure with a lot of four verticals, which is what you saw with Ward. A lot of that. What you didn't see in between with Ward a lot was that intermediate game, the drop back game, the timing passing game that is important in the NFL. And while I think he can do it, I would rather. I know that he's going to be. He was seen as a first round commodity and an early first round commodity, when I could be taking other players that I think are safer first round commodities. And then when it comes to the rest of the players on the board that people have talked about, I just don't think that they have either the processing, pocket, accuracy, and big play upside as a thrower and a runner that Milroe does, and that they're all a little bit overrated in terms of where they were being valued. So from my perspective in this class, it's not a great class. It has potential to grow into a decent one, but a great class to me, or a good class like last year, it gives you at least 3 to 4 quarterbacks that you look at and go, there's probably going to be 3 or 4 quarterbacks that are going to be starters at least for the length of their contract, and probably for a second contract. This class, I don't know if there's going to be more than 2 or 3, and I don't know if they'll get to that second contract. I think that there'll be maybe 1 or 2 that do. And Milroe, I think, is one of them, and knowing where you can get him. So that's the big reason for me.
He ends up being a 3rd round draft pick. He'll probably start sitting behind Sam Darnold, a quarterback that had a good year last year, but I think over the course of his NFL career has struggled. How do you see? Do you see Milroe potentially filing into the starting role later this season if Darnold struggles, or how do you see that evolving?
Yeah, I think they want to sit him. They're going to use the VR goggles with him the way Lamar Jackson had used VR with Bobby Petrino and at Louisville all those years, and people were not calling him a running back or a wide receiver, which kind of made me laugh. And then you had Jayden Daniels, we know his story, where he vastly improved from his time at Arizona State to LSU thanks to VR. And they're doing the same program with Milroe that they did with Jayden Daniels. I think they'd like to take a year, hoping that they're going to be a competitive team. And if they're competing and they're not out of it early, then I don't think we're going to see Milroe in anything more than maybe a kind of situational role. Maybe they'll give him some snaps where he can utilize his run pass ability to stretch a defense and threaten them in packaged plays, and maybe expand it a little bit more and more over the course of the year, so that he can get some meaningful reps and experience of what it's like on a field with players who are savvier at disguising things than they are in the SEC, and as athletic or more athletic across the board from player to player. And if Sam Darnold and the Seattle Seahawks really just tank, just play poorly, and they're out of it after 6 to 8 games, or 8 to 10 games, I would say is probably more realistic. If that happens, then yeah, they may consider putting Milroe in to give him opportunities, um, and see what he can learn from this year heading into the following season.
Matt, I wanted to ask you about Shadeur Sanders. You wrote in the RSP that you're kind of surprised how high he ended up after you went through your entire process and the checklist, so on and so forth. Tell us a little bit more about Sanders, and then maybe why he dropped past Dylan Gabriel, who you talked about a little bit earlier, and some of his flaws.
Sure. I mean, I think with Shadeur Sanders, the answer with him is that when I first studied him last year, I wasn't unbelievably impressed with his game, um, and I saw him more as a backup borderline contributor who could maybe develop into a journeyman starter over the course of time. And he moved up a little bit more on my board this year as I started to watch more and more of his tape. And it was, but still to the point that I still saw him as more of a contributor starter, meaning how you would define that for quarterback is a player who, if you put enough talent around him, he can develop and give you production like a decent NFL starter. I would say that Derek Carr is probably the longest term was the longest term kind of contributor level starter who people saw as a legit starter. Or a Jimmy Garoppolo was kind of that way. Or Kirk Cousins was a guy who grew from that and evolved into a legitimate starter. And I think Sanders had a chance to maybe develop that way. Or Baker Mayfield early in his career. Good example of that.
Right.
I saw Shadeur Sanders in that kind of frame. And what I liked about him is that he didn't make the same mistakes twice in a game. He would learn from his mistakes. He was someone that you could see that he was good in the quick game and that he could climb a pocket, even though he didn't always do it. Um, I think that the Colorado scheme wanted to let him move around a lot and buy time in ways that might be more counterproductive in the NFL, but they were asking him to do that to create more than he was just taking liberties that the team didn't want him to do. For the most part, I think he read defenses reasonably well, and he was confident with a lot of leverage in the middle of the field. So I thought he was a competent prospect on tape. Where I think that Shadeur Sanders fell is twofold. You know, the part that you can blame on Sanders and is his responsibility is the fact that he's an adult. Now, and as a young adult, he did not make the right decisions to blow off teams with the pre-draft process in the way that he did, or to take it less than serious, take it with not have the serious nature in which he took how he approached this pre-draft process, and then some of the responses that he had with like with Brian Dable in terms of them getting into it and him reacting the manner that he did. Also, some of the things that he seems to be focused on seem to be more about things related to fame and related to things that are more a sideline to football. Now, there are a lot of quarterbacks who've done some of that and have been just fine. But I think what happened is the NFL got scared. What they got scared about was not only Shadeur's behavior, but his dad Dion's behavior. And people are trying to make it an equivalent to the Mannings and the Manning family. And I would say that there are some false equivalencies there, because I believe that the Manning family didn't come right out and say they're not going to that Eli wasn't going to play for the Chargers until it was already leaked by the Chargers, and saying that as a negotiation move to try and call them on what they were saying privately. Whereas Deion just kind of came out and just listed teams, mentioned that he had teams he was going to that Shadeur wasn't going to play for, or that Deion, meaning well, maybe as a parent, wanted to put his kid in the best light, but as someone who's showing narcissistic behaviors, um, you see a lot of triangulation with his kids in public, in interviews. The kind of he's kind of the face of his kids' play and what he's done. Kind of, he's been the high school coach. He took over as the high school offensive coordinator. He's been with his kids coach basically through college, at least Shadeur's, and all the way through. And you see some me kind of behaviors, even when it's about Shadeur. It's underneath that. It's still ultimately about Deion. And so, you can be a narcissist and mean well, but you can also it still ends up being about you. And it still ends up being a situation where when you grow up with a narcissist, you can be you have to cope by people pleasing. You have to do a lot of people pleasing, and you also aren't always ready for criticism from other people. So, you're spending so much time trying to be perfect for what your dad's program is that when other people, come along and criticize you, you may have difficulty handling it. Or you listen to your dad saying, this is what I did, and maybe getting advice that he shouldn't have gotten. And it's not even all of that. Even if that's not the case, even if none of that actually manifests in the pros, the biggest problem that teams dropped him for is this. Teams they already have a percentage of players on rosters who come from environments where maybe a player is going to be dealing with a parent who's overbearing in terms of their involvement in with the player's career. Whether it's
Sure.
and it can be there's a lot of dads like that, the little league dad, and they come from all cultures,
Soccer
all
dad.
economic backgrounds, soccer dads, all of that. And so what happens is sometimes they will pick a player who there's a family member who's just now calling up the facility, just showing up at the facility and trying to talk to people that they have no business talking to, and creating distractions for staff. Maybe you work for let's just say the Cleveland Browns. You work for the Cleveland Browns, and someone come there. I'll say this. There was a player that at the Kansas City Chiefs I heard about a few years back, I think the mother and father came up to the facility, and they're literally disrupting, people who are in marketing and accounting, people who have nothing to do with player personnel, but they're disrupting the entire process because they're there and they want someone to help them. And it has to do with something that makes no sense to make, or there's an issue and they're having a problem, and now they're being quoted in the media, and now owners have to answer to this stuff, and now Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless are all talking about it, and it's being talked about everywhere over our yellow journalism TV. That things are now, the whole water cooler journalism that's going on in this era. And so that's distracting. And then it becomes a problem. And coaches don't want that. They don't have time for that. And so imagine the average parent who isn't a Hall of Fame cornerback, isn't a high profile head coach at a Division I program, who doesn't have the phone numbers of probably several players in the league and a lot of owners, who can call a press conference at any time and be unbelievably disruptive because
Right.
their player didn't win a competition. Their player was drafted in the first round, and he doesn't like what's going on, and he doesn't have control over his player anymore. and he would very much like to maybe submarine an outfit so that he could be the coach for that NFL team. So where does this actually, where is this a win-win situation? It's a lose-lose situation, and I feel sorry for Shadeur Sanders because I think Dion was a great player, and he has merits as a coach for sure. But his son is probably, more importantly, his son is probably may perform well, and he may even get more opportunities if somehow Dion wriggles his way into the Cleveland Browns organization. Um, if he's able to do that, but long term, this is not a healthy situation, and I think that teams realize that, and they just let him fall to a point where they could easily turn to their owner, turn to their GM, or GM and owner could easily turn to the player or to the guy complaining on national media and say, shut up, your kid's a 5th-round pick. He wasn't a 1st-round pick. We didn't pay him starting right now money, and he needs to learn things, and here's the program, and you're making a mountain out of a molehill about a 5th-round pick, even if he's talented. And I think that that's what happened, is that the Browns, he fell to a point where they just said, it's good, this is low enough that we're getting a guy who has, I would argue, 2nd or 3rd round talent, depending on how you look at it. And they got him at a price where they can say, look, if you can manage your business away from the field, and manage your business in the facility, then we've got something here. But we have doubts.
Yeah, that makes sense. So another thing, Matt, I wanted to ask you about Shadeur. I've been interested in this idea that, I mean, a lot of athletes say, hey, you got to play a lot of sports when you're young. So at the high school level, a lot of successful quarterbacks have played multiple sports. Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes. Shadeur didn't. And, someone like Cam Ward did, who was the leading scorer in basketball at his high school. And probably part of the reason why he didn't get big scholarship offers. Cam Ward had to go to Incarnate Word first, and then Washington State, and then Miami. So do you ever think about this when you're watching these guys tape and how they and their development?
I mean, it's a great question. It's funny. I was asked about this recently by someone, and I think that there's benefits to playing multiple sports in the sense that how would I'm trying to remember I wish I remember the name of like the person who was talking about this on a societal level, but there's a famous writer, probably in an academic field, either in philosophy or in political science or sociology, who's talking about how, when you see people at a park and you look at our society about people in the park, you may see, let's give a perfect example. Say you see a black family and a white family at a public park, and the white families, having a family reunion and they're playing cornhole, and then the black family is having a family reunion and they've had a cookout, and you could say that they're both acting within their social structure outside, and the fact that they're both outside doing their thing, and they're doing it within their group, there's a level of security and strength and a function of our society that's a positive, that both groups of people can be outside doing their thing with the freedom that they're doing it and enjoying themselves. And there's a strength in our country because of that. But there's even more strength when, say, the white family says, hey, why don't you guys come over and play some cornhole with us? And now both groups are interacting, and now they're bridging their culture. They're bridging where they come from. And now you have cross-cultural pollination of ideas and values and strengths, that can benefit both. And so when you look at football, in that respect, you could say the same thing about, like, say, Joe Montana back in the day when he was a point guard playing basketball, and he was a good point guard. And
Hmm.
now he's running an offense that incorporates elements of what you would do as a good point guard, the West Coast offense. Or if you're Patrick Mahomes, who played shortstop and grew up with a Major League Baseball player,
Right.
and he not only did, and people first said he couldn't do the things he was doing at Texas Tech in the pros because they were looking too strictly at their culture of technique. That culture of, technique is really about whether it's something that's sustainable and efficient and works. So quarterback coaches will tell you that when you hear someone on TV talking about mechanics for quarterbacking and they're using Tom Brady as the example, that they probably need to rethink that, because that works for a Tom Brady type of athlete. It's different for a Patrick Mahomes type of athlete, and that there are
Okay.
different athletic archetypes. So Mahomes was the smart thing with Mahomes is that those things all worked well because he spent so much time playing baseball
Right.
that he was throwing like an infielder, which has real strengths, as we've seen,
Yeah.
to be able to do that. And then his coach, his quarterback coach or trainer, Bobby Stroop, you could go to Instagram and look up Bobby Stroop. I think it's Stroupe, Bobby Stroop. And you can look up all the things they do to train Patrick Mahomes, and it's all to basically take what he did as an infielder throwing a football and say, how do we make sure that when you get banged up that you can still do this stuff, and that your body's strong enough to do this without injury, and that we give you the flexibility and mobility and the strength and the stamina to continue to play the way you want to play. And they show all the training movements they're doing with him. And then they sometimes will even show some highlight plays that show the connection. So I think that definitely it's valuable to have cross pollination of athletic skills, because it is allowing you to create more pathways for like
Right.
neurophysical pathways for solutions in situations that are maybe unscripted or off script. And most sports have an improvisational aspect to it. Even though I would joke that maybe that's why bowling isn't a sport or golf isn't a sport. Though as much as I like bowling, and I made my dad laugh breaking drivers playing golf with him.
Right.
But the point being is that, yeah, that cross cultural or cross pollination of skills creates innovation, and it keeps the game breathing and advancing, because you're borrowing from different idioms. And it's the same thing, music's always been that way. Rock and roll was blues. You're looking at blues, gospel, jazz, and country music kind of blended in different elements of that. Jazz always has been growing in that way. So it makes football's the same thing. So it's like track athletes. I mean, you first saw it with track athletes, bringing in guys like Bob Hayes for the Cowboys, and people go, well, it's just speed. Yeah, but speed changed the game in terms of the passing game,
Yeah.
and how you would go about doing it. Or that Bill Walsh was looking for a type because he didn't want a Bob Hayes. He wanted a receiver who was undeniably explosive in the first 10 yards. And he
Hmm.
saw Eddie Brown, who was with the Bengals, and then Jerry Rice. And those were his two guys. He was like, this is what's going to make this offense go, because I don't care whether they can win 50 yards down the field. I care whether they can
Sure.
outrun people within the first 10 yards.
Fascinating.
So yeah, so it's all these different types of things like that. And I think that it's cool to see. But whether you say it's predictive or not, I would just say the best way I've looked at it from a pragmatic standpoint are the mechanics or techniques of what a player is doing. Is it repeatable without them getting hurt? Is it productive and efficient and sustainable for what it is they're trying to do? And so if that means Brett Favre can bring the ball down to his shoulder at 40, ball down to his knee and windmill a throw in a tight pocket at age 40, and still get it done, then I'm not, if there's a player like that who's the 19-year-old that I'm watching and shows that repeatedly in situations that project well to the NFL environment, I'm not going to go crazy over that and say he can't do it, can't do the job. But at the same time, if he's doing something that he's having problems with at this level, at the college level, and it's not going to get any better in the pro level doing it the same way.
So they have to be able to adapt. I mean, okay, so from what you're saying, I think you would agree that yes, it's probably a benefit if you play multiple sports. When you're looking at a prospect, would you, let's just take Caleb Williams because he's the other example that comes out that didn't really play any other sports in high school. Would you put a ceiling on a player like that to, perhaps innovate out of the pocket or whatnot? Or is it more of just an individual basis? I mean, obviously there's going to be outliers that only play one sport.
Yeah, it's just an individual basis thing because Caleb Williams to me is going to be one of the. I still think Caleb Williams is the best rookie quarterback that was on the field last year. He may not have been the most productive, but I thought that I would say if I don't have any problem saying as well as Jayden Daniels played. If you put Jayden Daniels in that Bears offense, he would have looked worse than Caleb Williams. I think Caleb Williams survived an absolute crap show. And because he had, literally the Bears offensive line was awful. The offensive coordinator put DJ Moore, their best receiver, in a role that he was not used to doing, and his route depths were all over the place and unpredictable. There were selected drops and plays where there was no real selected drop prescription for what to do, which is something that Williams wasn't used to. So it's kind of basically figure out what your drop should do to match these routes. And then then he's getting the crap beat out of him in the first half of games and missing throws that he was making at USC that were these off script nice plays, but he was getting hit so much in the first half that it affects how you're able to. He was just off on a lot of those big time throws. So then they bring in Thomas Brown to just basically perform emergency triage on this offense, and his fantasy numbers, if you just look at as a reflection of production, he became a top 5 quarterback over the stretch of that period. And it's not like Thomas Brown could revamp the offense and reinstall it. He was just saying, let's cut this out. Let's change this. Let's make it simpler and do simpler things and get rid of all the things that are killing us. And next thing you know, in the second half of games, he's making these throws because they're shortening his time to throw the ball in the pocket and giving him simpler things to do and making it more straightforward. Ben Johnson understands offense. I don't think we're going to have a problem there. So and then when you look at what Caleb Williams does on the move at Arkansas and at USC and how he plays, he may not be. What he's doing is translating what other guy. He was influenced by guys who had multi-sport influences. So that might be a good way of looking at it, is that he wasn't, he's copied a lot of guys with what he's been able to do, using his athletic ability to apply to being influenced by guys who did those things. So his solutions, it's kind of like he's a second generation guy being influenced by that. Like if you emigrated this country and or your parents emigrated to this country and they're first generation Americans, they've made certain adjustments, but there's a heavy influence from their culture and country, most likely. But then a second generation American from a family that has emigrated, they probably have a combination of both, but maybe the things that their parents brought in from their culture and country, they didn't experience some of those things firsthand like for real in their country, that maybe their parents say to them, yeah, you had to be there to really get it. Like there sometimes, and there's some things you don't have to do that, obviously, depending on the culture, but there are things where obviously the firsthand experience might have even greater depth. But for the kid might be able to go, well, I've learned enough watching my parents that they're influenced by that. And it actually still adds, it still adds a flavor or element or factor that makes it unique and valuable.
Yeah. Before I let you go, Matt, I wanted to ask you about one more rookie quarterback from this year. Last year you were not high on Drake Maye. He did seem to come in with not a lot of weapons on offense and perform somewhat well. What is your opinion of Drake Maye?
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't really changed all that much because, like, for me, high on a guy is really about score rather than ranking. So my ranking probably didn't look great compared to other people. But when it came to like his score was still in the realm of a player who could develop into a starter. But when I looked at his game, you know, the you saw, he was a safe, technically sound athlete. Okay, so like he's the quintessential robo quarterback. Comes from the prominent Division I program, prolific yardage and scoring, requisite completion percentage, big frame, height, big arm. But his situational game management needed work. His pinpoint placement and accuracy and completion percentage didn't track. His processing coverage accurately and confidently was not there across the board. He was late with pre-snap and early post-snap diagnosis to get off on the right foot with where he should be going and what he should be doing. Sensing pressure and pocket management had some gaps. Now these aren't things that were all those things were always bad. They were things that had things that he needed to continue to work on. But when you talk about where he maybe can get better at his craft, I would say that he was someone that I still saw issues with processing. I saw the team make things a little bit easier with his reads and looks, but the pocket skills still were, they were decent, but still had some issues. I mean, it's not like if he was all that and more, he would be carrying that team to wins that team was not capable of having. And I think that, when teams were able to get pressure on him, he could move, but then making the next good throw off and on, good and bad a little bit with that. I thought that, there's some things that you look at when the defense was giving him opportunities to play well underneath, or that they were letting him take chances downfield, he made those plays. But when it was time for them to say, we're going to put you in a corner and we're going to make you paint your way out of it, because we know what we're going to make you do, and we don't think you're going to have an easy time proving us wrong. The defense was right. And that's the thing. It's like Baker Mayfield year one. A lot of people saw year one and said, oh, I'm very excited about what he did. And what I try to share with people with quarterbacking is that defenses, opposing teams, don't scout players don't implement what their scouting is for the first 5 to 7 games. Okay, they scout them, but they're not looking at like college tape immediately and going, well, let's try this against him based on what we saw him do against North Carolina State.
Right.
They're waiting to see, they're playing their defense, and they're waiting to gather enough games so that they can look at it and say, all right, here's some things that we do well with our personnel and our scheme that we think could foil Drake Maye. And that may amount to maybe 3 or 4 things. And they're 3 or 4 things that don't happen on every play. They may only happen on selected plays. And they test them with that. They're not going to change their whole philosophy in game 6 or game 7 to face Drake Maye. And then if one of those things works well and really foils him, well, the next team's probably going to see that with their scouting. And then they implement that plus a couple other things that they do. And over
Right.
the course of time, they collect a book on these players. And then what you start to see is after maybe about 12 to 15 starts, you see this quarterback maybe experience a dip. It usually in their late in their first season or somewhere during their second season. And then suddenly people are like, he's regressing. And you're like, well, his production's regressing, but no, the teams are just starting to develop an idea of what he does and doesn't do well. And what you're seeing before the scouting is, oh, he's playing like he did in college on the positive end, and he can translate that in the NFL end. Good. That's what we would expect. That means that he's learned the playbook. He's practiced well enough that he knows things well enough to do what he could do within his power. And then the second phase of those games that we just talked about is really when you look at it and go, is he going to be what he is right now, good and bad, or is he going to be able to overcome this stuff and grow past it? And if you grow past it, you're most likely a star second contract player. Most of these guys grow past some of it, but not enough of it. And they're either getting franchised like Daniel Jones and then becoming journeyman backup starters who are hoping to maybe beat out somebody or just get recycled around the league who can give you certain things that they can do, and then there's certain things you're going to be in trouble with.
Right.
Mayfield went through a lot of that, but for Mayfield, his instance is that according to his wife, who gave a very public interview saying when he was bounced around between Carolina and L.A. and Carolina, he had basically a realization that he was not doing the things and approaching the game the way that he should have in Cleveland, and that's why he was struggling and not advancing well, and he was coming under fire from teammates as well and fans. And he's gotten better because he had that moment of realization that I'm not working either hard enough or smart enough. And people have been
Right.
telling me things and I haven't been listening to it because it's a multifaceted, very difficult position. And when you're young and you're confident and you've gone through all this, it's very easy um, for you to think that you've got a handle on it until it's too late. I mean, you look at Drew Lock; he's a great example of a player who Peyton Manning called him up when he was drafted and said, "Anything you need." But Drew Lock spent all his time during his career, high school and college, getting coached, but being told the things that he could work on. And he just, nice kid, would say thank you and go about what he was doing. Played at a mid-level SEC program where there was no competition to put him on a bench. So when they told him he needed to do things better, he was like, yeah, sure. But, you know,
Right.
he wasn't doing the extra hard work. He was a
Right.
good kid, smart kid, great arm, good SEC quarterback. But once he got to the NFL, he didn't take it to that extra level. He wasn't preparing behind the scenes at the level that Peyton Manning was, like in the bowels of the basement of Tennessee's program, late at night working on his drops and working on all the
Right.
little details. Or Lamar Jackson every morning, with his egg biscuit or whatever and going on VR before he does anything with his day and doing it every day throughout his career. So when he got to the NFL and he turned down Manning and just said thanks and hung up, well, year three is when he called up Manning and goes, can you help me? Well, it was too late. I mean, Manning did, but at that point they brought in Teddy Bridgewater to compete with him, and he lost. And his dad literally told people, and I'll finish up with this. His dad literally told people that, listen, my son's a good kid, but we've been telling him since high school that these are things he needs to work on, and he just didn't really figure that out. So that's kind of the problem with quarterbacking, is that it's a performance position. It's not a science. It's a performance craft. And if you've ever done any things on stage, you realize that there's some science and there's some technique to it, but a lot of it is about developing your craft so that you can deal with the public aspect of it, the stage aspect of it. And that's a very different dynamic.
Matt Waldman, thank you so much for joining me on the Football Analytics Show. Please let everyone know where they can get RSP.
mattwaldman.com.
Awesome. You've been listening to the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and I will talk to you again soon.